Welcome back. This is Chapter 7, Part 1, Section 7.1, Tissues and Organs of the Skeletal System. In Chapter 7, we'll be talking about bone composition. We'll be talking about how bone tissue functions, develops, and grows over the course of a human lifetime. We'll be talking about how bone metabolism is regulated and some of the disorders relating to the skeletal system. In general, bones and teeth are the most durable remains of the once living body. And you guys know this. You guys know that a skeleton of a deceased person will last much longer than the rest of the tissues. Living skeleton, a lot of times we mistakenly assume that it's inert, that it doesn't do anything, it's just there. In fact, it's a dynamic tissue. It is full of living cells. It has nerves and blood vessels going to and from it, and it is doing a lot of very active roles in our body. We also sometimes mistakenly assume that once bone has grown, it's just there. And that is also false. Bone is continually interacting with other organ systems and remodeling or rebuilding itself on a day-to-day basis. Osteology is the study of bone and bone tissue. Specifically, in section 7.1, we're going to be learning the tissues and organs that make up the skeletal system. We'll talk about the functions of the skeletal system. We'll talk about bones as tissues and as organs, and we'll look at the features of flat bones and long bones, comparing and contrasting those two types. The skeletal system has three components: bones, cartilage, and ligaments. So bones are the most easily identifiable type of tissue. Cartilage is the precursor to a lot of bones, and it also covers the joint surfaces where mature bones come together. Ligaments hold two bones together at joints. So ligaments are bone-to-bone ties. Tendons, on the other hand, are bone-to-muscle joints. And so tendons we talk about in the muscle chapter. Ligaments we'll talk about here. They are truly part of the skeletal system. Tendons are not. A lot of the functions of the skeletal system we know intuitively just because we've lived in a body that has a skeletal system for many years at this point. So, of course, the skeleton functions as a support system. It is the structural support of your muscles and a lot of your various organ systems. Everybody knows the skeletal system is protective. The cranium protects the brain, the vertebra protect the spinal cord, the ribs and the sternum protect the heart and the lungs, and so on and so forth. Connections between bones allow for movement. Bones being somewhat flexible and having cartilaginous portions allow for breathing and your chest to expand as you breathe. Your calcium and phosphate levels are controlled in a large part by your bones, by calcium and phosphate being released or taken up by bones to regulate the amount of those things that are in your blood. Some of the buffers, remember we talked about buffers previously at things that prevent large pH changes. A lot of our buffers contain phosphorus, and so release or uptake of phosphorus from the bones allows the proper amounts of buffers to be in your blood. Blood formation itself takes place in the bone marrow, which is part of the bones. Osseous tissue is the technical name for bones, and as we've talked about before, bone is actually connective tissue with a hardened matrix of calcium phosphate with other minerals incorporated into that matrix. The hardening process is called mineralization or calcification. And within the skeletal system, individual bones are considered organs. And those individual bones consist of tissues, including bone marrow, cartilage, adipose tissue, nervous tissue, and fibrous connective tissues. So we have 4 different classifications that bones can generally fall into. We have flat bones that are thin and curved and generally serve to protect soft organs, and your sternum in the front of your chest where your ribs connect, and your scapula or your shoulder blade are 2 examples of flat bones. Your pelvis is another example. Long bones are just what they sound like. These are rigid levers, we like to think of them as, and they provide a foundation or a structure for muscles to move against. So they're typically mostly involved in movement. Radius and ulna in the forearm, humerus in the upper arm, tibia and fibula in the lower leg, femur in the upper leg are examples of long bones. Short bones are things that are not flat bones or long bones. They are equal approximately in length and width, and they tend to move in lots of different directions. So the carpal or wrist bones and tarsal or ankle bones are good examples of these. And then irregular bones, such as your vertebrae and skull bones, are elaborate shapes. They are shapes that aren't easily captured by the other 3 categories. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the general features that most bones have. Okay, so the first thing we'll talk about is compact bone. Compact bone is found outside of the bone, on the outermost layer. It is the densest type. Inside that is spongy or cancellous bone. Okay, so that's going to be the spongy tissue anterior to the compact bone. And that spongy bone is going to be mostly found at the 2 ends, at the epiphysis, here and also at the other end here. So if we were to look at the amount of mass that these have, compact bone makes up 3/4 of the mass, and the spongy bone, where it's much less dense, makes up 1/4 of the mass. Long bone is generally divided up into the diaphysis, or shaft of the bone, and then the epiphysis, which are the enlarged areas at either end, where the ligaments and tendons attach. Some other features that most bones share are articular cartilage, and this is hyaline cartilage. If you don't remember what hyaline cartilage is, check back in the connective tissue chapter. Hyaline cartilage, and the purpose of that cartilage being there is to allow the joints to move freely. We also have nutrient foramina. Okay, so anytime you see foramina, a foramina is a hole in a surface. And these holes allow blood vessels to get through into the bone. We also have the periosteum. The periosteum is the external covering, even outside the compact bone. Then we have the endosteum, which is connective tissue lining the inside of the bone marrow cavity. We also have the epiphyseal plate. We commonly call this the growth plate, and it's an area of cartilage that separates the epiphysis from the diaphysis. Okay, so if this is our diaphysis and our epiphysis, the line between them, the growth plate or the epiphyseal plate, is right there. Okay, so this is where growth takes place, and In adults, it's just a bony scar that marks where the growth plate used to be. And then we also have the marrow cavity inside of the diaphysis, inside of the bone shaft. Looking at flat bone, we can see this kind of sandwich shape where we have a layer of compact bone, a layer of spongy bone, and then another layer of compact bone. Both surfaces are covered with periosteum. The spongy layer in the middle is called the diplo, and it's there to absorb shock, and the marrow space is found within here as well.